So a couple days ago on the channel, we talked about the fact that Mario Golf was indeed coming to the N64 Online expansion pack side of things for your Nintendo Switch, coming out next week. And Nintendo actually sort of gave us a roadmap when they first announced the N64 portion of the Switch Online expansion stuff, which I thought was very sort of not Nintendo-ish because of the fact that we're usually in the dark about this. Looking at this roadmap, we know that Mario Golf was indeed one of the upcoming games. And of course, we know that Kirby and the Crystal Shards and Pokemon Snap are the two games left to be added to the service via that graphic that they showed in the initial trailer. Because of that, I thought that there's sort of a problem looming on the horizon. I talked about it in a video a couple of days ago. Some people disagreed with my stance on it, sort of talking about the future of the service, because they were like, oh no, there's plenty of great N64 games that they can add. There's tons of stuff that they can do. And I mean, I thought about it a little bit more. I came up with some other games I would like to see, so I kind of want to talk about that, but I also want to talk about just the future of the service in general, because I think it's time. I think it's finally time that we started expanding our minds a little bit more, started thinking a little bit more outside of the box with this, especially when you look at things like PlayStation Plus's new tiers and of course what Xbox is doing with their Game Pass stuff. So that's what we're going to talk about in today's video, sort of a casual discussion. First time on the channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button, like, comment, and share on the video if you enjoyed it or if you disagreed with it, because at the end of the day, that's fine. These are just my opinions. But without any further ado, let's just sort of jump in to, I guess, the meat and potatoes of the subject. So looking at the initial future here, we of course have to talk about the fact that, like I just said, Kirby and the Crystal Shards and Pokemon Snap are the next two games. Obviously, that's going to be a May game and a June game, and then that's it. We don't know about anything else beyond that. And I do feel like it is a bit more limited than a lot of people sort of realize as far as what games can be added. There are tons of great N64 games. Don't get me wrong, I love the N64, but I feel like you kind of get into a situation with a lot of these games where it's like, have they really aged all that gracefully? You know, you could throw pretty much any Super Nintendo game or NES game, and there's still a certain charm to it, but a lot of these 3D games from the first era of 3D games haven't really aged all that gracefully. I talked a lot about Donkey Kong 64, and yes, Donkey Kong 64 probably will be added to the service. I don't think it's a very good 3D platformer. There's a lot of people that disagree with that. That's fine, just be respectful of it. But as someone who didn't play that game until I was an adult, I don't have any sort of childhood memories about that game because I never played it. Playing it as an adult, you could see there's a lot of problems with that game. There's a lot of core issues. I feel like a game like Super Mario 64 can be enjoyed by anyone, even today, because of how smooth it is. Whereas with Donkey Kong 64, they obviously were pushing the Nintendo 64 to like its limits. You know, you had to have an expansion pack to make it look nice and make it run a little bit better. I just don't think that that game has aged all that gracefully. Now, something I did come up with as I was thinking about more potential N64 games were there's a lot of racing games that I think would be really fun on the system. And there's two that I didn't mention in my previous video that definitely need to be added to the service. The first one is, of course, Wave Race 64. Now, Wave Race 64, yeah, you know, it's a little bit rough around the edges, but I still think Wave Race 64 it's just a really fun game. You know, it was one of the more impressive N64 launch titles I felt that sort of came out in that launch window, and it's a really good game. You know, there is that, of course, multiplayer aspect to it, so you could tap into the online portion of the game for the Nintendo Switch version of it. I think there's a lot of fun things you could do with Wave Race, and that's definitely a game I would like to see added. Another game is, of course, Diddy Kong Racing, and I hope and pray that it's the original versions of those games with those terrible voices, not the DS one. No. I want Banjo, the redneck from Alabama who's gonna shoot you for walking onto his property, and of course I'm Conker, the little innocent fur buddy, because I mean, let's be real, Conker's Bad Fur Day probably won't be on the system because that's an M-rated game. But Diddy Kong Racing, you know, is a fantastic game. I love the adventure mode in that game. I love the multiplayer in that game, and just the different types of races that you could essentially do in that game definitely lend itself to the Switch Online expansion pack service. And I mean, there's a lot of racing games that you could add. You know, I think the what was it, Top Gear Rally was a really good racing game, sort of an off-road sort of game. Of course, there's that Mickey Mouse, you know, inspired Mario Kart game that came out, Mickey's Magical Speedway, I believe it's called. That's a really fun game too. But I keep kind of going back and seeing that a lot of the games that, let's be real, could actually come to the service are indeed racing games. I mean, you got your Pokemon Coliseums, obviously, you know, the Poke kids will really like that. You can look at games like Jet Force Gemini too, you know, that's kind of a game that's been forgotten by time, but a lot of those games also rely on Rare. Now, Rare is obviously playing ball with Nintendo. Microsoft themselves are playing ball with Nintendo, but it does kind of limit things. You got your 1080 snowboarding, like, fun game, but you know, have those controls really aged all that well? That's sort of the problem with this service, is that a lot of the games that can be added to it were like available on the Wii U. You know what I'm saying? There was a ton of N64 games on the Wii U, so does it make it really special adding it to this service? You know, it just depends. It depends really, and it boils down to what games you grew up playing on the N64, what games you have fond nostalgia for, because a lot of these games have not aged gracefully at all. There's a lot of mature rated games for the N64 that I would like to see. You know, Resident Evil 2, I think that's a fantastic version of Resident Evil. I love just how high res everything was when you were playing that game, and the fact that it fit on a cartridge was very impressive. But once again, you know, that's not something that's going to come. And you look at the third party stuff on the N64, it's a bit limited. You know, it's a bit limited. What are you going to put Mischief Makers on there? Like, I would love that. I think Mischief Makers is a great game, a 2.5D game, but you can't do like Castlevania 64. That game sucks. That game sucks. And anyone who likes that game, I really feel like there's something wrong with like your vision or something, because the game is trash. You're going to put Hybrid Heaven on there from Konami? Like, you know, not the greatest game in the world. And of course, the N64 lacked what all Nintendo systems up until that point had. RPGs, like, yeah, you could put Ogre Battle 64 on there, which is a strategy RPG. You're gonna put Quest on there with freaking Brian. The dude's name, it's a magical adventure. Oh, here's Brian, because Brian is a real magical name. It's not a magical name. So I just feel like Nintendo might have put themselves into, you know, backing themselves into a corner, because a lot of these games rely on licensing. A lot of these games sort of rely on just nostalgia. And I feel like, you know, some of these games aren't going to hold up all that well. But we then come to like the bigger picture with this, is that you look at what the other companies are doing. And, you know, obviously a lot of this is being spurned on by what Sony just announced with the PlayStation Plus services. We're talking about PS1, PS2, PS3, and PlayStation Portable games coming to the system. So this is kind of a big deal, because Sony obviously is sort of leaning into their back catalog of stuff. And when you look at Nintendo's back catalog of stuff, like, that's some of the more impressive stuff available on the system. In my original video, I did mention that I would like to see Game Boy added, because I feel like Game Boy is yet once again another system that has a lot of quality titles. These games are from a time frame where they weren't really trying to, you know, push the Game Boy to its limits and run all these crazy 3D games that the system was not capable of, just to make really fancy screenshots. And when you played the game in motion, you know, it kind of sucked. But I do think that that's a system that needs to be looked at here, because there's a lot of nostalgia for it, and a lot of these games hold up well. But what about beyond that? What about other systems? What about other things that they can do? And is it time for Nintendo to actually look at the GameCube side of things? And I mean, yes, it is, because when you think about the GameCube, you know, look at when the GameCube came out. It was in the PS2 and Xbox era. The PS2 is going to be well represented on what PlayStation is doing with PlayStation Plus. It's already available, you know, on some PlayStation Now stuff. Obviously, there's not a whole lot of titles, but you have to imagine that there's going to be a lot more PlayStation 2 games added to the service. When you look at what Xbox is doing, you can play a ton of original Xbox games on your current Xbox Series X without even having to re-download them or anything. You pop a disc into it and it plays. Nintendo, though, has always been very protective about the GameCube, because Well, I mean, really, they can resell a lot of those GameCube games. I mean, Wind Waker is a GameCube game. Twilight Princess is a GameCube game. Yet we consistently rebuy these games. We bought them on the GameCube. We bought them on the Wii U. And it seems like they're going to re-release those games, hopefully with some quality of life improvements, on the Nintendo Switch, since Breath of the Wild 2 has indeed slipped into 2023. But what about beyond that? Like, there's tons of awesome GameCube games that you could do that they're not taxing games. They're not hard games to emulate on this system. It's obvious that it can be done, but is Nintendo willing to actually do it? We technically have a GameCube game on there with Super Mario Sunshine, the worst Mario 3D game of all time, but hey, it's on there. Ooh, I'm making a lot of people mad with my Sunshine and Donkey Kong 64 thoughts, but beyond that, there's tons of games on the GameCube that you could do on there. Skies of Arcadia, Star Fox Assault. I mean, the list just sort of goes on and on. Just taking a glance over here at my GameCube games. Godzilla, Destroy All Monsters Melee, Metal Gear Solid, The Twin Snakes, exclusive game, by the way. Metroid Prime. Evidently, they're doing a Metroid Prime thing, so now they're remaking that so that you have to buy it again. Luigi's Mansion. What else we got here? The Star Wars games. You know, Star Wars is popular still, so I feel like there's enough first-party and third-party stuff. Eternal Darkness. Like, come on, man. It's time. But there's a Wave Race on there too. There's a Wave Race. I'm looking at it right there. I don't even know if I've ever played that. What is that? Wave Race Blue Storm. I think that might have been a purchase that I just kind of put on the shelf because I don't remember playing that game as a kid. F-Zero GX. There are so many GameCube games. And the GameCube is a system that can be emulated on the Switch. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Like, you can run GameCube games on like a crappy PC now. Spoiler alerts, the Steam Deck is going to run pretty much every GameCube game in the world. The architecture of that system isn't something like the PlayStation 3 where Sony decided to cheap out on it and do the cloud stuff. This isn't something like the Sega Saturn, which has been relatively difficult to emulate ever since, you know, emulation became a thing. This is an easy system to do because it's essentially just a Wii. Like, you don't have to worry about putting the Wii games on the Switch because of the fact that you don't have the motion controls and stuff. I mean, you could sort of do it with the Joy-Cons, with the single Joy-Con, but you know, why aren't we talking about GameCube? Why do we feel like Nintendo, there's like no chance in hell of Nintendo putting GameCube stuff on the system? And I really think it's because of us. It's because we get excited when, you know, there's rumors about Wind Waker HD and Twilight Princess HD coming to the Switch, even though we played them on the GameCube and we played them on the Nintendo Wii U. With things like Metroid Prime getting a remaster, okay, that's a little bit different. I can give you some lenience with that, but why can't I play Metroid Prime 2 Echoes on there? Like, why can't I play GameCube stuff on my Nintendo Switch when it's a system that it's over 20 years old? Nintendo, I really feel like with the future going forward, Nintendo just needs to drop this whole thing. They need to drop this whole thing of keeping, you know, clutching their pearls to their chest, you know, keeping everything close to their heart so that maybe down the road you could get a remake of a game or something like that, when realistically 99.5% of the GameCube library will never be remastered on the Nintendo Switch. The GameCube library will never be brought to the Nintendo Switch on like a compilation or something like that. This is something that Nintendo just needs to get over, especially when you look at the future of this system, because these companies aren't playing around anymore with their back catalog of games. And I really feel like having GameCube stuff on the Switch going forward in the future would just make for a great experience. Like, you're gonna get more sales. You're not gonna piss people off because you're adding in more systems to your ecosystem of Nintendo Switch Online stuff. Do you need to maybe make another tier for GameCube stuff? I don't think so, but if you wanted to, maybe make it a $5 or $10 additional charge, you know, I think people would be really into that. So I don't know, I'm kind of just rambling about this, but I just felt like it was a topic that I wanted to explore a little bit more because some people kind of got the wrong impression the other day on my initial video talking about it. So I wanted to expand upon it more because I'm just trying to hold Nintendo to a bit of a higher standard. I know a lot of Nintendo fans just kind of take what they can get. I'm obviously more of a video game fan than just a Nintendo fan. I just happen to talk a lot about Nintendo stuff, but I think it's time, man. I think it's time that we start holding Nintendo to a higher standard. I think it's time for Nintendo to realize that they need to do things like this to make their online services more attractive. And why limit yourself? Why limit what gamers can play on your system from your back catalog of stuff, especially if you're thinking that, hey, you know, this is how it is going forward. This hybrid nature of a system is what Nintendo is going to have to do, because it's what's working for them right now after the spectacular failure of the Wii U. So let me know in the comment section down below what you think of all of this. And as always, guys, thank you for checking out this video. If you are new to the channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button, like, comment, and share, and all that good YouTube stuff. And as always, I'll catch you guys on the next one. Later.